honestly, this is a subject that could be talked about for days. And so and by the way, a huge amount of different opinions depending on which company you talk to. And everybody's trying to get let's face it, businesses are about making money for their share owners, so everybody has got a different axe to grind. And I'll boil it down to a couple things. Number one, the last 30 years, the U.S. economy in general, and I know we've had some ups and downs, but the number one growth engine we've had is around the internet and broadband, whether it's wireless or wired. And what is that? Well, my gosh, Cisco that you worked at, all the infrastructure type people, the carriers that put out broadband, the new guys that have come up like Facebook and Salesforce and Google that run on top of it. Huge growth in this country because of access and the net infrastructure that's out there that creates broadband. Not just this country now, but the world. If you ever look at our economy, two of the things that we export in this world is Silicon Valley, where they're creating a huge amount of innovation, and the other places that do that, like Boston, et cetera, and Hollywood. And so you look at that and you go, oh my gosh, that's great growth. The last thing, I hate to say it, we need is the damn government getting involved. That's the last thing we need. I've been, as somebody, I was telling you, that's one of my friends said, I finally graduated from AT&T after 35 years and off to my new world here. But in that 35 years, I saw a huge amount of really negative things, unintended consequences from regulation. And I could go through 1,000 of them. So the first thing I would say is, let the government stay the heck out and let companies work it out. We have a great relationship with Facebook, for example, that AT&T does. And we've worked on projects with them together, same thing with Amazon and even Google. And we're going to compete in the marketplace. I think the business models are different, but I don't think the government needs to solve that.
I spend a lot of my time thinking about spectrum. So the invisible airwaves that are connecting all of our mobile devices to networks. And, to your point, there are nearly 4 nationwide LTE networks here. The performance is great. Everything works well here. That's just not true when you get off a plane in both developed markets as well as certainly emerging markets. And, if the goal is to give everyone the opportunity to connect to the internet, when you go to places like Africa or India, and Latin America, Southeast Asia, you have a much higher percent of the populations that are rural, which presents some real challenges to getting people connected. So, when it comes to spectrum policy, you get a lot of focus in places like the US on bringing more spectrum into the mix to solve the capacity needs that these networks need in order to sort of breathe in that spectrum and push out, good, reliable services. And we think that's important, and we applaud that and support it. But what ends up happening, when we go to India or Africa and we start talking about spectrum and having, more sort of pro-coverage spectrum policies, those regulators sort of look at high-profile events like the spectrum auctions we had here and the amount of money that it raised for the U.S. Treasury, and they start thinking very short-term, that as they bring new spectrum into the mix, they need to sort of maximize the financial return from the operators, as opposed to trying to figure out how do you get networks to expand beyond where they currently are today. So, you end up in a situation where you have operators in some of these emerging markets that have built out a certain dense urban topology, and then that's it. Like, the networks just don't grow, either because they run into practical limitations of being off the power grid or not having access to sort of telco backhaul, or economic challenges where that incremental site in a lower pop density area is just not going to capture enough traffic to pay for the OpEx of that site. And the policies in these countries aren't addressing it by encouraging encouraging more growth of the networks. The other sort of underlying, I think, challenge is that most of the telco equipment today is built by just a few big global players, and these are designed by companies like Ericsson and Huawei, which build great products, great technology, but they're made to be highly reliable, 5 nines of reliability, and therefore they have really high power requirements, which makes an Ericsson macro cell unusable in these places that don't have power. So there's a real opportunity for innovation, I think, on network technologies to build lighter weight, lower powered systems to get networks to go out. And you don't feel that here, but 60% of the world is not connected, and these are some of the reasons why.
I would say Chris's answer was right on target in terms of global reach. We need some disruption in the ability to do that. We need some government. I mean, we looked hard, and it was I'm not telling you anything that wasn't in the paper, to do wireless in Europe, that getting those governments to consider how good a broadband wireless network was and getting the spectrum there to do that was a very difficult thing. The other side of the coin, though, that we didn't really talk about is it has changed the world. And so that companies that start anywhere, in some cases I had, so with AT&T, very small businesses, one-line businesses, one person, and yet they were selling globally. You could argue that Alibaba, big IPO, great company, but they really were a fairly small company when they started in China, but because of the internet and the infrastructure, they were able to reach globally and create a really valuable company. And so I do think there's a globalization in business that is allowing businesses, because of this infrastructure, to reach anywhere where they have access. I'll make it very quick on the privacy thing. I'll quote, do you all know who Scott McNeely is? One of the founders of Sun. It's now gone. It's now an old technology company. It was new at one time. But
Oracle.
It's Oracle now. He talks about, and it's a really good point, he basically, if you ask him about privacy, he says, if you think you have privacy, forget it. You gave it up a long time ago. And there's no doubt Google knows a whole bunch about you, and Apple and Nest, now part of Google, et cetera. But he also makes this point, which I love, and it's really true. If you let the market, at least in this country, you let the market work, this country, you vote with your pocketbook. If you don't like how Google's using that data to serve you up better services, serve you up, and maybe trend things for you or whatever, you can vote with your pocketbook and not use that, or Facebook, if you don't like how Facebook uses your data. The concern I would have on privacy is not the company so much, because they get regulated by the market, because all of us vote that way. And we've all seen it happen numerous times. A great company, boom, gone. And it's the governments that's a little worrisome, because they don't have competition. And so having strong laws about how the government can or can't use that data, I do think is important.
On the privacy side, I would agree. I mean, I'm more worried about what the government will do with my data than having a big government body to push privacy laws or things like that. Because a lot of that's driven by pundits that are, privacy experts that care a lot about it. And in some ways they over-sensationalize the issue. I used to have a security company, and we over-sensationalized every security breach. But at the same time, it's very real. So if you didn't have those things, so perhaps the government could be, and they've already done this, I think the market has said people's privacy policy must be stated and updated, and whether that was government driven or not, that's kind of the right thing. How do you get somebody to read that? It's totally different. And then how do you sort of know what people are doing with it? Even harder. So on the privacy thing, I think it's just a big, complicated message, but I think it's something that we should all care about. We should ask what's happening with our data, and if the market is the thing that drives the right pieces to happen, that's fine. But you just don't want to ignore it.